I'm going to talk to the room. Hi, room. I'm so glad to be here today addressing you, and let me tell you why. As you know, especially covering and following this election from outside of the US and our terrible media system, about half of America stands poised to elect a known dictator insurrectionist who's facing 91 criminal counts back into office. And it's up to us to stop it. And we've got some assets and we've got some liabilities, right, in that process. But today I'm looking at, even though I can't see anybody, I'm looking at one of our most important assets, people who are already tuned into Democrats Abroad network in France, and hopefully you have friends in the other networks as well. And you guys are going to be a critical, like, shoring up project. I hope you guys, I can convey how important your activism is going to be this cycle, because we have, Robert Kennedy running as a spoiler candidate. The campaign yesterday, because it's funded by MAGA, it's funded by people who funded Stop the Steal, in fact. We're caught in a room talking about how actually their only real drive is to make sure that Trump wins, right? So when I talk about Democrats Abroad, just writ large in your chapter, we need these votes, and we know what's keeping us from getting them. We know it's the orneriness and confusion of the multi-step process it takes, all of it generated from voter, right? Because it's not something that they send you a form and say, hey, election's coming up, you should vote, right? You have to do it all on your own. And so if you're hearing my voice right now, I want you to know we need you to find every single person you can find willing to reach out to other expats in every country across the world, because if we don't get these ballots in this time, it might be the difference, particularly if you happen to have people in your community whose vote would go to a swing state, right? We really want to hyper focus on maximizing efficacy. And one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that we're putting those votes where they are most needed, though they're needed everywhere. So I'm excited to be here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about, messaging and how we win that fight, and, how do we get people to be motivated enough to do all the onerous paperwork and steps. And so I'm excited to be here today. And that's exactly what it is. It's about, we don't need to have a conversation with people in Paris about whether they should vote that's, based on weird things. Okay. We need to be telling them, hey, did you hear that, Donald Trump is polling and right now is favored to win the election? And then, what I tell people when we're working on abortion policy is we've got a big problem in the US where many of the most committed women are in safe places. They're in Maryland, they're in Virginia, they're in Oregon, like me, right? California, New York, and they don't feel that personal threat. So that's why the national abortion ban has been such a focus of our messaging. And that's why Trump was pushed into making that statement yesterday. It really made the pro-life movement mad at him, right? So it's about getting people to understand they have a personal stake. And if you are in Paris, we might have gone there for non-political reasons, but I know that if you've been there the last few years, you've been thinking, dang, it's kind of nice not to be there because that looks scary. I just want to make sure people understand the America that we've built, for all of its, things that we could insult, okay, has amassed a military designed to keep global security stasis over the last 80 years. It was the lesson that the countries, the EU and European and other Western countries took from World War II, is that military strength can be a deterrence, okay? And whether you like that or not, here's the reality. We have a military that's this big, and it takes 10 countries, the next 10 all together, to match our military size. We built it and have maintained it on the idea of being the world's police. But that doesn't mean it has to stay that way. And if it falls under the hands of fascist autocrat, it's going to be extremely dangerous no matter where you are in the world. So I would really focus your conversations on not so much you have to vote because other people who are far away, who are not in your in-group, who are not necessarily in your tribe, you don't have a relationship, need you to, so we don't die, even though that is true, okay? We are facing that, but rather focus your messages on making them feel a personal cost. If there's the decline of global security, Europe is a great place to live, folks, but only because of the post-war stasis that we have. It doesn't have to stay that way, right? So in other words, there's nowhere to hide from a Trump fascist autocracy with the military that, a military that the world can't even comprehend. It's so powerful. So we really want people to feel a personal stake in what happens, that life in France is not going to be unaffected if Donald Trump abandons NATO and the United States ends up allied, loose axis of evil allied with Russia, right? No, right. So we really want to make sure our abroad people are motivated from self-interest, because as the book points out, even though we are very liberal, happy people that care about outgroups, right? I mean, some of us showed up and marched with Black Lives Matter and we're all white, right? So we care about outgroups, right? But most humans are not programmed that way. And we are very atypical when it comes to like other Americans, ex-abroad or whatever. We are not typical people because we really do motivate to help people that are, is not going to directly benefit us. And we want to make sure that we understand that most people, even Democrats, people who vote Democrats, aren't really wired in that same way. And it's probably better to make an argument that affects them, or they, if they have relatives back in the United States, which most expats do, you really can tie it into it's a you problem, not an us problem. So for you guys, I mean, if we were talking about something else, it'd be different, right? But you guys have a very specific group, right? You're Democrats abroad. So for me, it's about not so much like persuading people who you have to get them to A, vote the right way, and B, show up to vote. But if you know that they're voters, those independent abroad voters, then that's a different story. And we should be targeting them. And it should be about fear and stakes and about freedom, right? And making them, fear, stability of the geopolitical environment. But for you guys, like the main focus for me is, okay, you've got, this list of people that would vote for Joe Biden, ostensibly, if you could get them to vote, and yet it takes a lot of hands-on help to get somebody through that process. That's what I would like to see you guys focus on, is maxing out that turnout differential, because it's not very high because of all the hurdles it takes to vote, and because I would assume people are feeling very disconnected from the problems in America, which is why I said you want to make it a global threat problem, right? And if we can enhance those, I mean, the turnout for those numbers was very good for you guys in 2020, and I know that you were intentionally pushing that. So I'm really excited to see if we can make some gains on that, because we're going to have to offset some Gaza vote here in the United States. I mean, definitely in certain swing states. So let me tell you guys about polling. I have a blog on top of the book, and the blog's not firewall, but you can subscribe if you want to. Anyway, I put something out before Christmas because people were so angsty, right? And I felt bad because like I have this great big head of political science, like scientist, and I share it with you in the front half of the book so that you'll feel better and understand fundamental stuff too. And I was trying to tell people, look, yes, the polling shows that, because Trump is a forgotten entity to everybody else, to normal humans. Like, they haven't seen hide or tail of Trump in 4 years, and they're not going to until the fall, when the election campaign begins. I know that sounds extraordinary to people like us, because we read the news every day and we know who Kevin McCarthy is, and we know it took 15 votes to get him into the chair. But you can't go out into like the world in America, even in Eugene, which is a very, very smart town, and just go up to the barista after a motion to vacate and say, man, did you see that motion to vacate? And they'd be like, oh, like they'd have no idea what the hell I was talking about, right? So it's really important for folks to understand, like, the polls are measuring incumbent current. We've never had a situation polling before where we had two incumbent presidents facing off. Okay, so that's totally new. We don't have an incumbent and a challenger. We have two incumbents basically facing off. So I would have expected the polling to look the way it did. Now, don't get me wrong. We want to be seeing that polling shift, and we need to be seeing it shift once that likely voter model starts to kick in, and we're talking to people who are actually going to vote, and not just adults or people who are registered to vote, because again, turnout in the US is not 100 or 90 or 80, it's 60, right? So like getting that, differential figured out is really important. And we'll find out what's going to be happening with the polling. I would assume we're going to see a polling tightening, but what we really see in the poll now, even though the narrative is constantly about Donald Trump being ahead, is really a margin of error tie. Okay. It's a tied thing. It's been tied. It's barely fluctuated at all. It's been like this the whole time. And, average Americans will not pay any attention to this until September. And then they're going to be like, oh, God, I hate that guy. At least that's the assumption, right? And I also talk about the hard data. So what matters, though, are these elections, right? We're having elections all the time in America, and little states and big elections, little elections. And every time we've had one since they repealed Dobbs or the memo leaked, we have whooped their butts, okay? And we just flipped a 20 point margin swing race in Alabama, running hard on Roe and IVF, right? Abortion and IVF. And I think that once our messaging campaign effects start to kick in, you're going to see some shift in that. I mean, number one, the offset is getting high turnout of our broad Dems who will vote for democracy and can prioritize their own freedom over, something else. Because what the cost of third party or not voting for Biden, you're not going to hurt Joe Biden, guys. Joe Biden's going to get on an airplane and go somewhere else and live fine. Okay? The people who are going to hurt, that's us. Like, that's regular Joes, like especially people of color, people who are poor. Those are the people who are going to hurt, right? When they come and round up your trans friends, and they're rounding up Latinos by the millions in the Southwest on, anyone who looks Spanish and can't speak English, right? You're going to be thinking, damn, I didn't hurt Joe Biden at all. All I did was hurt America. So I think it's about getting people to move out of the micro intensity of that issue and back into the bigger stage of this election cycle. And, as I just alluded to, like that whole thing, that was actually like a message, right? And that message is, are you really willing to sacrifice your own freedom so to stick it in the eye of some guy? By the way, the opposition party's policy in Gaza is going to be to raise it and put a Trump Tower in the middle of it. So maybe also pointing that out, the price the Muslim community is going to pay in America is going to be very steep. On the Trump website, they already have all the stuff that they're going to do. They're going to, pull all the naturalized people. They're going to make and subject them to loyalty oaths. And it's not like you and me loyalty to the country. It's MAGA loyalty, okay? So if you're at all tolerant to Gaza, that means you're a Hamas sympathizer and that you are anti-American and your ass is headed into one of these deportation camps, right? So we really, really need people to get out of that, they're in these TikTok like holes, right? And I don't think a lot of them are assessing what will happen to me and my in-group, the people I care about, my friends, my coworkers, my family, if Trump is in power. As far as I understand it, RFK Jr. is not well positioned on this issue. He's just like everybody else. If you're actually in a responsible position or you've studied politics for a long time, then you'll know the Middle East is no simple problem. Okay, it's not like we just put the state of Israel on top of an indigenous population. The Jews were also indigenous to the area. It's a mess, right? And in Iran, in Israel's like perspective, right? I mean, you imagine being in France and everyone around you was an enemy. Like everything around you was an authoritarian enemy state that's actually like a religious theocracy, right? It's like almost every one of those countries are Muslim theocracies. They're not even, secular type authoritarian regimes like we, see in other places. So it is really, really, really important, I think, to make sure that people understand, the tremendous difficulty you have if you're the president backing away from supporting Israel when there's an opposition party who takes any equivocation again. And not Netanyahu is a hot mess, right? He should be gone yesterday. We need, Israeli people are trying to force him out because he's a crazy man, right? But like Biden can't. So in other words, Biden can't triangulate. There's nowhere to triangulate on this issue to make you happy, because if he did it, if he abandoned Israel, something terrible would happen to Israel, probably coming from Iran. Iran's already posturing about attacking them. And imagine Joe Biden trying to run for re-election after he backed off funding Israel and Iran attacks Israel. I mean, that would be a disaster for the world and for our effort to save democracy. It's assuming it's not 100% cut or dry yes or no, then let's move on. Because if it's not true, then obviously you need to make sure that people understand that there's no tax liability from registering or voting in America. But I don't know. I mean, that's the difference between, anecdotal stuff and data, right? So like what I'm talking about is data. What do Americans know about politics? How often do they read or watch the news? How capable are they of reporting either like contemporaneous political events or, basic functions of government, the separation of power system, who runs the Congress, right? And what we're talking about there is very, very low levels of civic knowledge. About 15%, 30% of Americans read the news sometimes or mostly, okay? And of that 30%, 15% are listening to Joe Rogan, who that's like, if you wonder why your workers are all radicalized, right? It's all coming from Joe Rogan and male talk shows and grievance politics. It's all, most of what Republicans are doing right now is to inflame men, right? And that's why you see the reaction in the data for men. So it's, we're kind of conflating two different problems. So like what you're talking about is real. I'm telling people all the time, do not expect there's going to be this landslide victory for Biden. I never expected that, even though I predicted his win a year out. I could have told you a year out also, it will be within a few percentage points. This is going to be some wide scale rejection. And the reason is we're not France. We're not Australia. We're not Canada. And as I lay out in the book, we are a civically illiterate country that is cultured, raised to reject politics. People are proud not to vote. People will tell you all the time, oh, I don't do any of that. And they are not embarrassed like a Peloton workout. They are proud because it's gross, right? So our culture has left us in a moment between the emergence of a new technology, which is exactly what did in Europe in the 20th century, new tech, radio. Nazis are like, ooh, that's healthy. That's a handy tool to use to hand out propaganda at a mass scale. So they used it. Now we have the internet doing the same thing, especially like the social media, YouTube, digital space, right? And we're going to see probably 65 million Americans at least vote for fascism. They want a one-party rule if it will leave white men in charge. Right? And they're getting a very clear message that this is it. If you want to put them back in their place, dudes, this is the time to do it, right? So we're really don't expect some big mass rejection. In fact, because the spoiler candidate, like Trump won on a plurality last time in those blue wall states, he can win again with 46% or 44% because Kennedy siphons off the vote. We are in a 5-alarm fire moment, right? And to answer your question, though, I do think the answer comes back to getting to these young men. And people are angry about the American economy all the time, even though it's the strongest in the world and faring way better than France right now. Right? They're always mad, but we don't give them anything to be mad at, right? The Republicans say, be mad at Biden, even, some magical wizard that controls everything in the economy, even though Donald Trump didn't control those same things, right? And we're just saying, well, we understand that you're mad, right? What we should be doing is making sure people, especially in rural Ohio, understand what happened to rural Ohio. And what happened to rural Ohio was the Republican Party's voodoo economic experiment that decimated rural America, decimated middle America, and has completely destroyed American greatness in terms of infrastructure, education, and other things, right? So like, if you're not going to make people not mad, you have to make sure that you're mad at the right person, though. And every time anybody who's earning a living, period, it doesn't matter white collar, blue collar, anytime one of those W-2 workers or a contractor votes a vote for a Republican, they're screwing themselves over economically, right? They have no idea that. We can't assume that they're going to know that. But yeah, so in any case, when we really look at a broad American mass behavior at the aggregate, most people have no idea that Donald Trump was involved in a multifaceted coup plot. They know there was a surge at the insurrection. They understand that thing happened, but they don't know that it was the last piece of a multi-state, party-wide effort to steal the presidency in 2020, right? And we have to make sure we teach them the most important stuff that they should know, which is what Donald Trump is not saying, not what he's saying, but what he's planning, which is all in writing on his website. So I couldn't read the rest of it, but I know the front end said I'm not comfortable, or I'm a little uncomfortable about using the word fascist. And I don't know what the bottom argument was, but I'm assuming it might have been, people don't know what that is, or it seems, way out of the left field. And what I talk about in the book is that 10 years ago, I mean, nobody knows what a socialist is, okay? You can go to these MAGA rallies and ask them, and they'll tell you Democrats are socialists, but they can't tell you what that means. And that is an asset, not a liability, okay? Republicans spent 10 years, 15 now, and every time they speak, they do the same thing. They always do this. Whatever Democrat, or if they're talking about Democrats for at large, they'll brand them as socialist, okay? So what the electorate does in data that we can see is they associate Democrats with socialism. No such thing for fascism, because, I'm a Cold War kid. Communism is dead in America. It might be still a thing over there. It's so dead here, you couldn't even find its body, okay? There's no communism at all in the United States because we killed it so much with the Cold War. But we dropped the ball talking about the right wing's version of extremism, because the left wing's version of extremism is socialism and communism. But the right wing has one too, folks, and it's called fascism. And its record is, obviously it speaks for itself, right? What the Republican Party is proposing is to purge the civil service of all the merit-based employees. They have a manual that they'll be handing to Trump when he walks into the White House from the Heritage Foundation called Project 2025. So you don't have to believe me. If you're uncomfortable or you think it sounds hyperbolic, go online and read Project 2025. And understand it's not some move on manual, okay? It is a thing that transformed the economy under Ronald Reagan and stole all of the money out of the Midwest, right? It's that same manual, except for this time, it's providing a transition to autocracy. And it seems crazy because it's a psychological, but it's very hard for humans to believe that something terrible is going to happen. So much so that, my big 3-year study of the Third Reich, I've read diaries from Jews in Poland who had been dispossessed, pushed into a ghetto, had to build their own wall around it, walking over dead bodies that are starving in the street, hearing about rumors about deportation east, that it means death. And in their diaries, folks, they are still optimistic. They are, this can't be true. That sounds too much. That there's no way the Nazis would do that, right? So your disbelief is my main research finding from 3 years ago. And I realized, wow, what a psychological lift to get people to panic before they lose the capability to stop it. If we don't win in 2024, we will lose that power. You don't need to say the word fascist to talk about freedom and define the Democratic Party as the party of individual freedom, which it is.